Hi! If you're new here, all you need to know is that I have watched the first season of the One Piece live-action adaptation, and now, for the first time ever, I am reading the manga, and, more specifically, the first 100 chapters that the live-action has covered so far. With all of that said, let's begin! Today, I'll be covering the chapters in Volume 4, from 27 to 35. First of all, for this volume, as recommended by quite a few people, I tried reading the official colored version. The only reason why I didn't start with that from the beginning was because I'm simply used to reading traditional black and white manga, plus, personally, simple ink on paper is my favorite art style to look at. But this colored version was really gorgeous, especially the panels that took place during dawn, and also the chapter cover page where the Straw Hats were floating in the clouds. After reading the volume, I went back and also skimmed the original version, so some of the panels really felt more impactful in color. In general, I think when you have very detailed and bold manga pages, sometimes color can wash out the original image and dampen the emotional impact. But since the art of One Piece is very minimalistic, the colors definitely do more good than harm, so I'll probably stick to that version from now on. I'm sorry for going on a tangent about art, but now we can finally get to the actual chapters. This volume was pretty much all action, so I might not have as much to say as usual, but there were still some details I really loved that I think are worth talking about. Also, as I guessed when talking about the previous volume, this arc is playing out very differently from the live action. There were only a few scenes that can be compared directly, while everything else was completely new material to me. But as always, I'll try talking about everything mostly in order. So the volume starts with a scene where we see that Kaya prepared a gift for Klahadore. And it's such a wonderful twist of a knife for the readers. I love that this scene comes after we already know the truth about Kuro. From what I noticed, it's a pretty common thing in storytelling to have your audience know more than the characters. It's like watching a movie when a character walks towards danger and you, as a viewer, already know they're taking the wrong path, but all you can do is simply watch the events unfold, even if it's frustrating. So, in this case, we, the readers, know just how badly Kaya's heart will get broken by this betrayal eventually. I kind of wish the live action had shown a similar scene, because I think that showing Kaya prepare a thoughtful gift shows how much she cares about Klahadore way more effectively than simply having her talk about it to other characters. Next, we get some light-hearted comedy as Onion, Pepper, and Carrot talk to the Straw Hats. It's so funny that Luffy doesn't even remember falling from a cliff and everyone just assumes he took a nap in a weird place. I also continue loving that Luffy has his priorities straight. When he hears about the attack, his first thought is about buying meat before the butcher fled from the pirates. On a more serious note, I think that this scene shows one of the main changes that the live action made, and I am talking about a general direction and not specific scenes. In the manga, all the characters, other than Kaya, are together and know about the pirates from the beginning, but in the live action, the fact that everyone was separated and didn't have the full picture was one of the main driving forces in that arc. After that, we get one of the few scenes that can be directly compared to the manga, and that is Usopp trying to warn Kaya. In the live action, Kaya didn't believe Usopp because he always lies, and that's it. But in the manga, I like the detail that she has an additional reason to distrust him. She believes that Usopp is trying to get back at Klahadore because of the earlier heated confrontation in the garden. Also, in the live action, this scene only had Kaya and Usopp, but in the manga, Mary and the guards also get involved, and we see quite a bit of action instead of just a conversation. The manga showcases how good of a shot Usopp is, and also how quick he is, because he took down 2 guards with a slingshot before they could shoot him with actual guns. While the live action, specifically in this arc, also established these things, we didn't get Usopp in real action up until the very end of the season. But this manga volume had so many cool moments for Usopp. I think that Usopp's introduction, specifically in the manga, was probably the strongest one out of all the Straw Hats so far. Next, unlike the live action, we see Usopp being forced to leave Kaya, and he meets up with the other characters. I love how he looks back at his village and cries because he knows that pirates are about to attack it, but the second he hears the kids call out to him, he immediately wipes off his tears and puts on a smile. I think this scene can be read in 2 ways. Usopp wants to look tough in front of them, but, more importantly, he doesn't want to upset the kids. His lies are only supposed to bring them joy, not scare them. In fact, that's exactly what the kids later point out when they say that they don't believe that Usopp would ever lie to hurt anyone. Luckily, our crew gets the meaning behind Usopp's actions. He sent the kids away because he didn't want them getting involved in the fight. Our crew promised to help Usopp. I want to point out that, right before that, Usopp talked about how much he loves his village. He never said it directly, but I think that this scene can also be read as him saying that his village and its people are his treasure. And we already know that Luffy fights for people and dogs who want to protect their treasure. I love that Usopp is prepared to fight even when he's shaking from fear. This specific aspect of his character reminds me of Kobe a little bit. Both of them show bravery by doing things despite feeling scared. Before I continue talking about our crew, I want to quickly mention that I love everything about Django, his design, the fact that he walks backwards, and even the small detail that in these chapters, he started covering his eyes with his hat to protect himself from his own hypnosis. All the characters, including the villains, are ridiculous in One Piece, and I love it. Don't get me wrong, I love serious and cool characters in other stories as much as anyone else, but the fact that One Piece goes to the opposite side of the spectrum is one of the things that make it so good and unique. I mean, Kura's jacket has the image of poop embroidered on it, apparently, and somehow that works for this story. Another thing I want to mention before I go back to our crew is Mary. So, he is alive, apparently. The live action had absolutely no hints that he could still be alive. Also, I want to thank all of you. I definitely mentioned Mary's death at some point in my videos, but none of you ever corrected me on that, so thank you. Honestly, I don't think that Mary will be a big character going forward. I guess he'll only appear in the background in future chapters, so my guess is that the live action won't even bring him back and just keep him dead. And while I'm on this topic, this makes me wonder about what kind of relationship One Piece Manga has with killing characters off in general. I know that there are a lot of people who criticize stories for never killing off characters because, in their opinion, those stories don't have real stakes. But I'm absolutely not one of those people. I believe there are many different kinds of stakes your story can have. Since One Piece focuses so heavily on dreams and protecting your treasure, taking these things away is just as bad as death. Even the author himself talked about it in SBS pages, but I'll go through those at the end of this video. Now it's time to go back to our crew. When I first saw that the defense place was going to be a narrow pass surrounded by cliffs with enough time to prepare on top of that, I thought it sounded too good to be true. Strategically, that's one of the best positions you can be in when defending something. So, naturally, it turned out that the Straw Hats were on the wrong beach at the wrong passage. While even before this arc, we had moments like these when our crew was stumbling around and somehow making it work out in the end, but this arc is the first one that makes it apparent just how hopeless they are. I feel that in some ways, that's very comforting for the readers, because in real life, people also often have to do things without really knowing what they are doing, so this stumbling around and trying to make things work feels very relatable. Here we also get a joke that I, personally, found one of the funniest so far in this entire manga, and that is Luffy getting lost because he thought that north is the direction that seems coldest. It's so hilarious, and it's also infuriating. I have never seen a protagonist who would be even remotely close to Luffy's specific brand of stupid. Also, I don't know if this is a coincidence, but in chapter 19, in Buggy's flashback, we saw Shanks and Buggy arguing about which pole is colder, the North Pole or the South Pole, so I guess now we also know Luffy's answer to this question. The next thing I have to mention is Zoro's uphill battle against oil. Zoro versus gravity has to be some sort of a pattern. In the live action, in this arc, he was struggling to climb out of the well, while in the manga he was struggling against oil. Both sequences are on the opposite sides of tonal spectrum, and both are wonderful in their own ways. Next, in chapter 29, we see Usopp trying to bluff his way out of the fight, which obviously fails, but I appreciate the effort. I feel like at some point in the future, we might actually get a scene where this strategy works, but that day is not today. Then Nami catches up to Usopp, and I absolutely adore their dynamic. In the live action, my favorite dynamic within the Straw Hat crew was Nami and Zoro, and in the last couple of episodes, also possibly Zoro and Sanji. But the scenes between Nami and Usopp that the manga gave us really switched things up. Nami and Usopp argue like siblings, and I really hope that this continues in the future chapters too, and isn't just a one-time thing in this chapter. I feel like I'm starting to get the hang of the tone of the manga, so this dynamic will probably continue to be this ridiculous. Next, we see Usopp take some serious hits to the head, and yet he continues fighting. He says my favorite line in this entire volume: "This will be another boring day for my village." I feel like this line is multi-layered. First, Usopp is fighting for real instead of telling lies about imaginary fights, and yet his goal is for the villagers to never actually find out about this. I think it can also be read as a form of disrespect against the pirates, something along the lines of, "You are so insignificant that the village won't even hear about this." But most importantly, it's just a badass moment and a cool line for Usopp. Next, in chapter 30, I loved Django hypnotizing his crew to become stronger, and what I loved even more was Luffy also getting caught in that. Like he needed even more power and craziness. The best part was him running towards the ship and breaking it. Somehow that felt like a very Luffy thing to do. But on a more serious note, I think that this scene kind of ties to the greater themes of One Piece, like the power of believing in yourself. Except here, that belief is fake, but the Straw Hats have real belief in their dreams, and that will triumph over anything fake. In chapter 31, Kaya hears the truth from Mary, and I adore that Mary acknowledged Usopp's courage, even if he is not there to hear it. After that, we get introduced to Butchie and Sham. As characters, these two were changed the most for the live action, other than the characters who were removed altogether, of course. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I think I enjoyed them more in the live action as a chef and a maid. The best thing these two brought to the manga, in my opinion, was adding to the whole deception theme prevalent in this arc, but I'll expand on this a bit later on. Next thing I want to talk about is Zoro taking a hit on purpose to avoid bringing attention to Usopp and Nami. Zoro is a very kind character, and it becomes more and more apparent in each new chapter. Obviously, all of the Straw Hats are kind. After all, being a good person is a prerequisite to become a Straw Hat. But Zoro is someone who doesn't look like he would be so kind, and that's why it stands out more than with the others. After some more fighting, Kuro shows up. I loved the mutiny scene. In the live action, the first time we saw Kuro use his speed was against Mary, but here it's against his own crew. I also like that we got a confirmation that his speed is just a technique and not a devil fruit power, because the live action, in my opinion, left it vague enough to the point where it was easy to assume Kuro had also eaten a devil fruit. And while I'm on the topic of techniques and powers, I also loved the explanation for Zoro's fighting style. It's easy to assume that having 3 swords works like addition, where 2 swords are better than 1 and 3 swords are better than 2. But as it turns out, it works more like a multiplication, where mastery of 3 sword technique is much stronger than simply wielding 3 swords. I like that explanation because I'll admit, initially I was a bit surprised by how much Zoro struggled against Butchie and Sham when he fought with only 1 sword. So the fight continues a bit more, Luffy gets woken up, and finally Kaya also shows up. I loved how she tried talking with Kuro, and when that didn't work, she just pulled out a gun. Usopp tried doing the same in the beginning of this fight. Negotiation first, and only once it fails, you resort to violence. I wish she didn't drop the gun and actually shot at Kuro. In the live action, this scene was rearranged a bit. In the manga, Kaya drops the gun because of Kuro's speech. In the live action, she only got angrier because of his speech, and only then grabbed a knife instead of a gun and tried swinging it at Kuro. I think if we combine the manga Kaya and the live action Kaya, we get a perfect Kaya. The manga Kaya seems like a more interesting character, but she unfortunately dropped the gun in the end. While the live action Kaya wasn't as interesting, but she took action when it mattered. I loved it when the kids started battering Kuro with a pan, a shovel, and a baseball bat. It did no damage, of course, but it was satisfying to watch. The different translations have different versions of what the kids said afterwards, but my favorite was the official translation, actually, where they accused Usopp that he smells like he's forgotten his faithful crewmen. I know I mentioned it 1,000 times already how much I love the addition of these kids to the story, but I'll say it 1,000 times more. My favorite is Onion, by the way. It seems that them and Kaya are getting separated and chased by Django, so I really hope that they manage to do something by themselves instead of waiting to be saved by the others. Django isn't the sharpest tool in the shed, so I have faith. So these are most of my thoughts on specific plot points, but like I mentioned earlier, I also want to talk about the broader themes in this arc. Very fittingly, there are so many deceptive moments. Other than the obvious lies like Koro pretending to be a butler or Usopp's constant lies, small deceptions are woven in throughout this entire volume. Our crew prepares to defend the pass, and it turns out it's the wrong pass. Nami slips on oil and deceives Zoro to get up. Mary is shown to be killed, only for us to find out he's actually alive a few chapters later. Bucci and Sham pretended to be cowards before showing how good they actually are. The whole fight had so many moments where the readers or the characters think it's one thing, but it turns out it's something else. And naming every single detail like that would take forever. But my favorite thing was actually the fact that all the characters, other than Luffy of course, have quite a few scenes where they say one thing, but deep down mean something else. For example, Nami kept saying how important this fight is, and then constantly adding that it's all about the treasure and not protecting the people. Then Zoro, for obvious reasons, was very angry with Nami, and yet he still made sure to protect her when it mattered, or warn her about an attack she couldn't see. He also shouted at her for kicking up his swords, but also thanked her later for the same thing, because it allowed him to get all his swords back. Even Kaya. She came to the fight to talk first, but all along she had a gun with her. All these deceptions, both big and small, tie this arc together nicely, even if you don't register these scenes consciously. It's not easy to compare this arc in the manga and in the live action because they are so different. It's not over yet, so I don't want to talk about it too much at this point, but all I can say is that sometimes I prefer how some things are handled in the manga, and sometimes I prefer the live action. To give specific examples, I already like manga Usopp more than the live action. In the live action, I think the actor did a great job to make Usopp very charming as a character, but he didn't really get all these great and courageous moments that he got in the manga. On the other hand, I think the live action was a bit more interesting in terms of the action. Obviously, the tone of both versions is very different. The live action went more for being scary and dramatic, while the manga is simply ridiculous from start to finish. I also liked what the live action did when they made our crew befriend Kaya before all the action, while in the manga they barely interacted. On the other hand, onion, pepper and carrot are great, and the live action, unfortunately, fully removed them. So all in all, each version has its own strengths, but they are difficult to compare when they are so different. Last thing I want to talk about is that Volume 4 introduced two new things, the cover stories and the SBS section. I think both concepts are great. From what I understand, the cover stories will tell about the adventures of side characters, one page at a time, and it feels like a very unique concept. In this volume, we saw Buggy, or what's left of him, furiously rowing away from huge and angry fish. So I'm guessing this first cover story will show how his crew comes back together for the rematch that I know was teased in the trailer for the show Season 2. I also might have heard something about a Kobe and Helmeppo side story, but I'm not sure if it was referring to these pages specifically. Please don't confirm or deny anything. The other thing introduced in this volume was the SBS pages, and while some questions were easily forgettable, Others were either genuinely funny or even teased some things for the future of this story. The main thing is that Oda's personality really shined through his answers. At first, I thought he might be trying to stay in character for those answers and keep the spirit of One Piece in them. But the more I read, the more I started thinking that it's the opposite. That he just genuinely is that kind of person and he wrote the One Piece story that aligns with his personality. I'll quickly list some of the highlights from this volume. Buggy's real hair under the hat. I'll never be able to look at him the same. Oda explaining why Luffy doesn't kill his enemies, which I also briefly spoke about earlier in this video. Oda masterfully dodging the question about Nami's measurements. Oda saying he dreamed of becoming a manga artist since he was 4. I think his answer reminded me of Luffy's logic a bit. He just decided he is going to do something and he did it. That's it. And last but definitely not least, a tease that there is a place that's crawling with people who have devil fruit powers. So I know that at the beginning of this video, I said I won't talk as much as I usually do. Well, that was a lie. And on that very fitting note, I am ending this review. My guess is that in the next volume, we'll probably end this arc and move on to the next one. If the live action didn't change the order of events, and I doubt they did, we should go to Baratia next to get the last member for our crew, and I am so excited for that. In the live action, I think it was around the Baratia arc when I went from really liking the show to being obsessed with it and all the characters. But that's it for now. Thank you for listening, share your own thoughts in the comments, and if you're interested, you can subscribe and I'll see you again as I review Volume 5.